Hello, welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I'm Damien.
And I'm Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week, we'll bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. Aaron, you're up this week. What are you bringing to the table today?
I am up.
We are awake.
Yeah, we're here. I'm bringing two essays by Toni Morrison that have been republished by In These Times magazine in an article called Toni Morrison on Fascism and Censorship.
Yes.
And the introductions to these essays note that Toni Morrison was part of a group of Black women writers who met in New York City to discuss liberation and be in community with one another. Sherell Barbee wrote the introduction and notes, quote, "For these Black literary luminaries and their successors, the gathering storm of fascism was an ever-present counterpoint to the North Star of liberation."
Ooh, yes.
Yeah, it's a word.
Yeah.
And she brings up why these pieces are still relevant today because, quote, "both public square and public services deeply eroded. These voices remind us there are no sidelines. A freedom struggle is being waged and fascism feeds on silence."
Yes.
So great stuff, great introduction. And as I read these essays, both of those things rang very true to me because, hey, yeah, how much does fascism just feed on silence and our willingness to let it go?
Yes.
But let me talk a little bit about these essays before we dive into them. The first is called Peril and was published in 2008. And the second is called Racism and Fascism and was published in 1995.
Yeah.
And literally both could just be about right now.
Absolutely.
And as I read them, I had that thought several times that we don't actually need to talk about these essays. We should just read them aloud here and release that. And that's the episode this week.
Yeah, that would be brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's something about that feels like passing off their work as Toni Morrison's work as our own. So we're not going to do that. We're going to as much as we can, very clearly say that we're quoting things when we say them. But so Peril is about the aversion that authoritarian regimes have to writers and poets and artists and what that aversion does and the ways that artists get targeted. And Racism and Fascism is about the steps of fascism as Toni Morrison saw it, the way we get to a fascist state.
Yes.
Or a fascist organization, whatever it is. So that's the very brief introduction to the essays. And yeah, I thought these could just be about right now.
Yeah.
And they felt very connected to what's going on.
Absolutely.
Around the world for us at the moment. Even though Toni Morrison's been gone for a while now.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, where do you want to begin?
Yeah.
What stood out to you?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I agree. These absolutely could be essays that were written this year and published this year. But the essays, the content in them, the lessons we can take from them are just so incredibly relevant to what we're seeing and experiencing today, really all over the world. So I'm really glad you found, I totally missed this in these times. So I'm really glad you found this article that has republished these essays and we get this opportunity to talk about them. What an idea to just read them. People, if you haven't read these essays, you definitely should. They are brilliant. I think in so many ways they were a clarion call about the dangers and the creep of fascism and racism and about their impact on squashing dissent, on not allowing anyone really to speak out against authoritarianism and the state and state violence and all of the dangers of our society. And I think that was a huge part, particularly of the Peril essay.
Yeah.
You know, Toni Morrison warns us of this by saying, quote, "Authoritarian regimes, dictators, despots are often, but not always, fools. But none is foolish enough to give perceptive, dissident writers free range to publish their judgments or follow their creative instincts. They know they do so at their own peril. They are not stupid enough to abandon control, overt or insidious, over media. Their methods include surveillance, censorship, arrest, even slaughter of those writers informing and disturbing the public. Writers who are unsettling, calling into question, taking another deeper look. Writers, journalists, essayists, bloggers, poets, playwrights can disturb the social oppression that functions like a coma on the population, a coma despots call peace, and they staunch the blood flow of war that hawks and profiteers thrill to. That is their peril. And I think what's important about Toni Morrison's warning here in this essay is not just the dangers of authoritarianism on writers like herself and June Jordan and the others in this incredible group, but we know that this danger exists for all of us too, right? You know, we've talked about how this danger exists for abolitionists and organizers and college students and literally everybody in between who speaks out against the state and this violence. And, you know, we've seen that violence come to a head in so many ways and in so many just awful, violent ways. And so I think, you know, one of the things that I sort of sat with when I read this was certainly the danger was real for Toni Morrison and her comrades, her peers, but it's certainly real for all of us too.
Yeah, and I think that one of the main points I took away from Peril that really stood out to me is that I think she's talking about writers as sort of canaries in the coal mine. And so she says, quote, "We all know nations that can be identified by the flight of writers from their shores. These are regimes whose fear of unmonitored writing is justified because truth is trouble. It is trouble for the warmonger, the torturer, the corporate thief, the political hack, the corrupt justice system, and for a comatose public. Persecuted, unjailed, unharassed writers are trouble for the ignorant bully, the sly racist, and the predators feeding off the world's resources. The alarm the disquiet writers raise is instructive because it is open and vulnerable, because if unpoliced, it is threatening. Therefore, the historical suppression of writers is the earliest harbinger of the steady peeling away of additional rights and liberties that will follow. The history of persecuted writers is as long as the history of literature itself, and the efforts to censor, starve, regulate, and annihilate us are clear signs that something important has taken place. Yes. Cultural and political forces can sweep clean all but the safe, all but state-approved art."
Wow.
Art threatens the agendas of authoritarians.
Yes.
You think about any time that Trump makes a speech and there are journalists there, he always calls attention to the journalists in a negative way and paints them in a particular way. And just in broad strokes.
Broad strokes, yep.
And just says negative things about them. And he's doing it because he knows that they're going to potentially be able to tell the truth and see through.
Yes.
They're talking, like she's talking about swindlers. She's talking about all of this stuff. She's talking about him.
Yes.
And a lot of other people across our political spectrum. But yeah, art threatens the agendas of authoritarians. And you know, this point also made me think of the 128 journalists that Israel has killed in their genocide in Gaza.
Yes.
And it made me think of all the books that have been banned across the United States.
Yes.
Killing writers and poets and removing their work from libraries and schools, all because they're a threat to the order of the day, whether that is a systematic destruction of people in Gaza or conjuring fear of critical race theory or trans people or DEI in general, the woke mind virus or whatever nonsense the right wing is peddling that day. All of this is done in the service of protecting their interests and protecting the what they want us to believe, because they know that this work, this art, can peel back the wool that they're trying to put over our eyes.
Absolutely. Well, it also just makes me think about what they say about what it is that they're doing. So you talk about the Trump example, you talk about the banning of books, and what it is that what they say it's about is protecting our children. But you talk about exactly what it actually is. And I should say more clearly, Toni Morrison talks brilliantly and beautifully about what it actually is here in that quote. I love that. And so, yeah, I think you're right. There's something really beautiful and important about art in our society. So I really appreciate that point, you bringing that. And again, all of this is so relevant to what we're seeing today. So if we can, let's talk a little bit about the racism and fascism essay. And those two ills, if you will, of our society are absolutely what she focuses on and warns us about in this essay. So there was a lot in this essay that I loved. One of the things she said was this, quote, "In 1995, racism may wear a new dress, buy a new pair of boots, but neither it nor its succubus twin, fascism, is new or can make anything new. It can only reproduce the environment that supports its own health, fear, denial, and an atmosphere in which its victims have lost the will to fight." And I think that last point in particular is like such an important takeaway from this essay, and absolutely, still applies to this day, even though this piece is from 1995. Racism and fascism not only operate in conjunction with one another, but they are also stoked by the fear that is our silence and our unwillingness to fight against it. And simply put, that can't happen, right? Like we have to face and name racism and fascism when we see them, and we certainly have to fight against them in all of the ways in which they show up in our society.
Yeah, and it makes me think, I just saw this anecdote online again. It popped up somewhere, but this guy was sitting at a bar, and it's one of those like crusty punk bars that exist in the world in a variety of places. And he's sitting there having a beer, and somebody else comes up, asks for a beer, and the bartender very bluntly says, "No, get out of here. You're not welcome here. Leave."
Okay.
And all the guy did was walk up and ask for a beer.
Yeah.
The patron sitting there says, "What's going on?" And he said, "You didn't see it, but he had all of he had neo-Nazi symbols on him.
Wow.
He had fascist symbols on him."
Yes.
And the way that it works is one guy comes in as a test, and he's nice enough.
Yeah.
He's polite. He asks for a beer. He exchanges pleasantries. He probably tips well.
Yeah.
But soon a couple more guys come in with him, and then all of a sudden, like it's a Nazi bar.
Yeah,
and
just like that.
We can't do it.
Yeah.
Like, so we have to nip it in the bud. And it's that same thing.
Absolutely.
Like if you just let one person in, next thing you know, it's an infestation of Nazis.
Yes,
It's not just one you got here.
Uh-huh.
Now and then you have a whole infestation.
Uh-huh. Oh,
So-
good example there. Yeah.
Yeah. But so we can't stay silent because it spreads.
Absolutely.
More of them show up because they think it's a safe place for them.
Yeah. Right.
And
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's no safe place for fascism.
No.
There shouldn't be. So one of the other pieces of racism and fascism in that particular essay that I really appreciated is when she's talking about how fascism can really dig into any political system, even bars.
Yeah. Yes, clearly.
So she says, quote, "The forces interested in fascist solutions to national problems are not to be found in any one political party or another, or in one or another wing of any single political party. Democrats have no unsullied history of egalitarianism, nor are liberals free of domination agendas. Republicans may have housed abolitionists and white supremacists. Conservative, moderate, liberal, right, left, hard left, far right, religious, secular, socialists. We must not be blindsided by these Pepsi Cola, Coca-Cola labels, because the genius of fascism is that any political structure can host the virus, and virtually any developed country can become a suitable home.
Yes.
Fascism talks ideology, but it is really just marketing for power." Like, what a statement.
Yes.
What a statement.
Wow.
And it really points out that we can't trust any political party or system just because we believe they've been good in the past.
Yes.
Because she says it here, fascism is a virus and can take any host. So we can, it can slip in wherever it is. Because it's not about the policies, but it's about the marketing for power and the ability to consolidate power around a select few and create the illusion of power for their supporters and give them a role to play.
Yes.
And something to buy into.
And takes
and
off.
to say, hey, I really appreciated that. Both thrown in Pepsi Cola, Coca-Cola labels. I thought that was just such a nice, sharp, jab.
Yeah.
But also talking about, it's not about what party you're in or what. It's a virus, and it can take root. It can take over any host.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think what makes that Pepsi Cola, Coca-Cola labels part really so brilliant is this. I think what's important is trying to figure out ways to make describe fascism, make it clear, make any sort of concept clear to folks, and help them understand how dangerous these things are. And so I think, describing it as sort of two sides of the same coin, if you will, that Pepsi Coke analogy there is just so good, and it does that so brilliantly. So yeah, I definitely was like, woo, when I read that. You just read that quote. There's literally right after that in that essay, it continues. So I just wanted to read the rest of it there. She talks about how we can recognize fascism in our society. So she says, quote, "It is recognizable by its need to purge, by the strategies it uses to purge, and by its terror of truly democratic agendas. It is recognizable by its determination to convert all public services to private entrepreneurship, all nonprofit organizations to profit-making ones, so that the narrow but protective chasm between governance and business disappears. It changes citizens into taxpayers, so individuals become angry at even the notion of public good. It changes neighbors into consumers, so the measure of our value as humans is not our humanity or our compassion or our generosity, but what we own. It changes parenting into panicking, so that we vote against the interest of our own children, against their health care, their education, their safety from weapons. And in effecting these changes, it produces the perfect capitalist, one who is willing to kill a human being for a product, a pair of sneakers, a jacket, a car, or kill generations for control of products, oil, drugs, fruit, gold." It just kept going, right? Like this essay is just so brilliant and powerful, and scathing and poignant analysis of what fascism does to our society, right? And to all of us. And there's nothing about that I think is good or healthy for us. This idea of becoming the perfect capitalist and our willingness to kill one another for these things. And again, I also just can't fathom, and it's hard to wrap my head around the fact that this is from 1995, but it still rings true today.
Yeah. There's no, as I was reading it, I didn't have any notes. There wasn't anything that stuck out. That was like, yeah, this was written 30 years ago.
Right. 30.
No, that didn't happen. You just read it. You're like, yeah, that's from 95. Okay. Yeah.
Ooh.
All right. Well, let's talk about application. How do these articles apply to our day-to-day lives and work?
Yeah.
Haven't we already said it?
Yeah.
A little bit. But my application comes from the end of Peril, when Toni Morrison says, quote, "Certain kinds of trauma visited on peoples are so deep, so cruel, that unlike money, unlike vengeance, even unlike justice or rights or the goodwill of others, only writers can translate such trauma and turn sorrow into meaning, sharpening the moral imagination. A writer's life and work are not a gift to mankind. They are its necessity."
Wow.
And one of the big points of this essay, as you can see, is that art helps us make meaning of what's happening around us.
Yes.
And if it's taking a critical look at things around us, then it's helping us to resist fascism and racism.
Absolutely.
And that's why I think art is so crucial. We need poetry, we need stories, we need songs, because they help us better understand ourselves and understand one another.
Yes.
And in many, many ways, they bring people together.
Yes.
In subtle ways that are resistant to fascism, because fascism wants us to be individualized.
Yes.
Racism wants us to be individualized. Capitalism wants us to be individualized. And if we can recognize that we owe each other things, and we're all part of a network of interconnection, of interdependence, then it's much easier to resist, I think, the rotten fruits that we're sold.
Absolutely.
In fascism and racism and all the things.
Absolutely. I love that you have harped on this point so much in this episode. I think that's such beautiful application. And, we've talked about this before, but that's exactly why I appreciate getting to read things like this and talk about pieces like this and other creative works as well. And we see so much of it, as we talk about abolition. But, what this creativity brings to our understanding and to our humanity is undeniable. for sure. So I appreciate that application. There's really so much in the way of application from these beautiful essays from Toni Morrison. My application actually comes from the introduction to these essays, and it's just this simple statement. It read, quote, "Today, with both public square and public services deeply eroded, these voices remind us that there are no sidelines. A freedom struggle is being waged, and fascism feeds on silence." And I love that you started there, and we get to finish here too. That is, to me, is such a powerful statement, and I think is one of the biggest pieces of application of these essays. To me, there's nothing more important than our freedom struggle and our collective liberation, and we have to continue to fight for it. And and I appreciate Toni Morrison and all of the creative folks out there who give us art to help us tell that story and help us, be connected humans through this work as well.
Yeah. Yes. I think, be a patron of the arts.
Yes, absolutely.
Buy the things. All right. Well, now it's time to talk about homework.
Okay.
What do we want to do to continue our learning and unlearning beyond our conversation today? My homework is to go read the partner essays to this article from In These Times that were written by June Jordan.
Yes.
That is a similar kind of article where there's two articles published in something called June Jordan on Palestine and American Delusions. The article features life after Lebanon and waking up in the middle of some American dreams. So I just think it would be great to dive into those because I don't remember when these were written. I didn't take note of how
the published date.
How old these two essays are. And I think one of them is an excerpt.
Yes.
But they are going to be powerful and enlightening, even if they are, again, from 30 years ago.
Absolutely.
There's a lot that has changed in our world. And there's a lot of things that haven't changed in our world in that time.
As we've talked about today. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's great homework. And I agree. I think we should talk about bringing June Jordan's essays to a future episode soon. So let's put a pin in that. The homework I'd like to do is to just read some of Toni Morrison's books. I mean, she was obviously a prolific novelist. She won the Nobel Prize for literature. And so all of her books are, I think, must-read books. So I would just love to pick a book, any book, and add it to our list as homework from this, to just continue to read her brilliance. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think I can't remember the last Toni Morrison novel
I think it's been a long time for me. So
it'd be great to get back to that.
Yeah.
All right, Damien, you're up next time.
Yes, sir.
What do you bring to the table in our next episode? It sounds like maybe you gave it away.
Take the pen out. I don't think that's how that expression goes.
No.
We're recording late, folks, and I'm tired. I love your homework so much, and I think we should just go ahead and do it next week. I was thinking about this after I read this article and these essays and, the connection to June Jordan's essays. And I was like, why don't we just read them for next week and continue this conversation? So for next week, I'm bringing the partner article that you mentioned called June Jordan on Palestine and American Delusions. The intro leading into June Jordan's essays, and they are excerpts of her essays, in this piece says this, quote, "Life after Lebanon," which is from 1984, Jordan reflects on the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982, funded by American taxes, of course, the backlash she faced after publicly condemning it, and the fearless women who supported her in spite of it all. And below is an excerpt of Waking Up in the Middle of Some American Dreams from 1986. Jordan underscores the dire need for coalition building across differences. So, again, it just made sense to just keep this party going and to talk about these brilliant essays and continue to learn from another Black woman luminary, an incredible human in June Jordan. And so we're going to talk about these pieces next week.
Sounds great.
Yes.
Great. I'm glad you're going to do my homework for me.
Yes. Look at that.
Or with me, not for me.
With you.
Yeah, we're going to do that homework together.
I love it.
All right. Well, with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. You know what I'm going to ask you to do here, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life. Follow us on social media, including Instagram and TikTok. Check us out on YouTube. Sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. And we'll talk to you next week.